And we want to welcome everybody who may be visiting and watching online, as well as everybody who's here today. And I wanted to speak today from the passage, the gospel reading, which is one of those passages that is easy to dial out on. Jesus says, "A little while and you will see me, and again a little while and you will see me, because I go to the Father." And then some of his disciples say among themselves, "What is this that he says to us? A little while and you will not see me, and again a little while and you will see me. And because I go to the Father, and therefore, what is this that he says, a little while?" We do not know what he is saying. And we read the same thing and we kind of feel, I think, the same way. Why does John continue to repeat the phrase, "A little while and you will not see me," and again, "A little while and you will see me"? The passage becomes repetitive, and because it's repetitive, it's easy for us to just glaze right over it. Your eyes glaze over, you read past it, because the fact of the matter is we know the end of the story already. We know how this ends. We know why Jesus is telling his disciples, "A little while and you will not see me," and again, "A little while and you will see me." We know how the story ends. We know what's going to happen. We know that Jesus is going to be raised from the dead. So we pass by these words rather quickly, but I think it bears for us to really look into this. We need to open up this story a little bit more. To open up the story, we need to forget what we know and enter into the moment that John is portraying. John, in recording the story, also knows the end, but he's trying to communicate something to us, and we've got to ask why. Why is it important for John to continue to reiterate this? Why couldn't he have just relayed the story in shorthand? The statement, "A little while and you will not see me, and again a little while and you will see me, because I go to the Father," is truly repetitive. He says it almost 5 times in this short reading. And we have to ask why. The disciples, as John recounts the discourse at the Last Supper, don't know why Jesus is leaving. They don't know what is about to happen, and they cannot conceive that there is going to be a resurrection. The disciples ask themselves and one another what this means, and are really trying to struggle to comprehend why Jesus keeps on reiterating this over and over and over again. They struggle to comprehend it because it's really lying outside of their imagination. There's no scenario that they can conceive of where this makes sense. This is not supposed to happen in their schema of the way the Messiah is supposed to take up his rule. The Gospel of John is the only gospel that takes us up into the upper room and the Last Supper. It's the only gospel that opens up for us the last discourse of Jesus in this way. The primary discourse, for example, in Matthew is, perhaps we could say, chapter 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount and the ensuing words there. We could call that one of the most prominent passages in Matthew. For John, it's these chapters, from chapter 14 through 17, and we could say that they represent John's primary discourse. For John, the things that Jesus speaks of during the Last Supper clearly have deep significance. Written from the perspective of a true eyewitness, as one who remembers the details and bears the emotional impact of the event, John is bringing us back into that moment, a moment of incredulity, of doubt, of despair. Jesus is speaking things at the Last Supper, and they're struggling to really understand why he's saying the things that he says. In fact, this entire discourse begins in chapter 13 at verse 33, where Jesus says, "Little children, a little while and I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come." And then begins this entire discourse. Jesus begins to speak of his crucifixion and begins to communicate with them and tell them, in a little while, I'm not going to be here any longer. This is what Jesus is saying. And they're struggling to get it. They're struggling to comprehend that. No less than 10 times, Between chapters 13 and 17, does Jesus tell them in some way or another that he is leaving and that he's going to return? No less than 10 times. On the 6th occasion, for example, Jesus tells them clearly, pretty clearly, that he's going away and that he's going to the Father. But they still don't know what this means when he says, I'm going away and going to the Father. What in the world does he mean? They continue to struggle to comprehend this. It flies in the face, as I said, of their messianic hopes. It strikes at their hearts as he tells them about betrayals and rejection and persecution, the rejection of the world. As the world hated me, so the world shall hate you. And he is leaving them, and he reiterates it over and over again. They just can't comprehend how something new can be birthed through his leaving or through his death. So why does Jesus repeat this so many times? Why does he say during the span of this discourse in these few chapters, over or at least 10 times, I am leaving. I am leaving. Why? Why does he keep on saying it? Well, he says, there are 3 verses that cue us in. 14:29 says, and now I have told you before it takes place, so that when it does take place, you may believe. That's 1. I have said these things to you to keep you from falling away. That's 2. Most assuredly, I say that you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice, and you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned to joy. That's 3. There are 3 reasons why Jesus reiterates this, principally. The first is so that they would continue to believe in the face of adversity, so that they would not fall away. And finally, because they're going to be overcome with grief and despair. And they need these words to carry them. Lament is a word that we don't often use any longer, but I think that's a good word. You will mourn and lament, as it says in the New King James. It's mourning that turns reflective and studies its loss. There's a difference between just grief and lament. It's an anguish that breaks out into words that recount the loss. It's deep. It's deep. And so, for the disciples, for us too at times, the dark night of the soul comes. The dark night of the soul is from St. John of the Cross. The time when what sustains you is not the presence, but the word. Not what is seen, but what is unseen. It is a time when the divine presence seems to flee in the face of sorrow and lament, and something deeper has to sustain us. We should understand that the cross is not borne by Christ alone, but by the disciples too. He is taken and the shepherd is struck, and the sheep are scattered. He descends into hell, and they descend into fear and sorrow. So he tells them in advance, so that they will continue to believe when the whole world seems to contradict his promise to return. He tells them in advance so that they will continue to believe when the whole world seems to contradict the promise. This is important for us to know, because this is the way God speaks to us. God is always looking to sustain us, and there are times and occasions when the whole world seems to be running contrary to the purpose and plan of God, and we need to hold on. He reiterates it so that they would not fall away during that adversity. He tells them time and again so that when they are swallowed up in grief and sorrow, they have something else to hold on to. He tells them so that when he rises again and is seen by them, their faith will not waver. It's as if he's saying, remember, I'm telling you, before long I'll be gone and you will not see me, but be assured you will see me again because I go to the Father. He's saying it over and over again. He's saying, remember, remember, remember. He's trying to plant it in their minds and in their hearts because something inexplicable is going to happen, something that is going to be very difficult for them to bear. They will see him again and they will rejoice, but in the meantime, he's preparing them for lament and sorrow. The reality is that the crucifixion is and was for them utterly irrational. It literally made no sense, and there was no way to explain it that would make sense to them. If Jesus had said, listen, I'm going to be, and he did, I'm going to be betrayed into the hands of sinful men, and they will take me. This whole idea of being betrayed into the hands of sinful men or being crucified on the cross, they didn't have a place in their minds to put that. They were really struggling with what that would mean. And so, he could tell them, not rationally, what was going to happen, but he could tell them what it would mean for them. That's what's happening. Jesus is telling them what it would mean for them. Not necessarily what's going to happen, but what it will mean for you. It would mean sorrow followed by joy, like birth. Life is often lived between interludes of sorrow and joy, crucifixion, and the new birth of resurrection. There are times of inexplicable suffering and sorrow and lament, and there are times we can't sort out what's wrong with the world and why the world has dealt us such a blow. It is at these times that the words of Jesus come to remind us and strengthen us. The words of Jesus come to keep us. That knowing the meaning of what is to come, we believe through the suffering. That knowing the significance, we do not abandon the way and fall away. And that we brace ourselves for a trial that's coming, knowing that there is joy on the other end. This is the Christian path. Christ was crucified, and they ended up having to live in the tomb with them and wait for the resurrection. With him and wait for the resurrection. Soon something else would be born of their sorrow and his trial, and it will be a new beginning, and they will be filled with joy. But at that point, that's impossible for them to comprehend. And so it is for us. Oftentimes we find ourselves in times of struggling or sorrow or lament. We find ourselves in this interlude between life as it was. Remember, there were days that they enjoyed walking from town to town with Jesus, and miracles, and Jesus feeding the 5,000, and life was grand, and the Messiah was there. And now they're approaching this interlude, this time of quiet, this time of sorrow, a time of fear. They're stuck in this interlude. Jesus sees this coming. In fact, they're right on the precipice of it, and he wants to sustain them through it. And they may not be able to rationally understand what's going to happen and why, but they could comprehend the meaning of it as he shares with them these thoughts. He says, most assuredly, I say that you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. And you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned to joy. And he gives this example. When a woman is in labor, she has pain because her hour has come. But when her child is born, she no longer remembers the anguish because of the joy of having brought a human being into the world. So you have pain now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you. This idea of labor and pain and sorrow, and then that being eclipsed by the joy of a new birth, something new being born into the world. So we must ask, what is born of this sorrow? What is born of Christ's sorrow and suffering? Well, in Colossians 1:18 it says, and he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn of the dead, that in all things he may have preeminence. What is born is the man who is the firstborn among the dead. The firstborn among the dead. Guess who comes next? We, and all creation. For it says in Romans, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole world, whole creation, groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Certainly there are ways in which we can look at the events that have been unfolding around us, and we have felt like we are in this interlude. And I think in many ways we are. And I think in many ways it's not over. But there is this time, this period of lament and sorrow as we wait for something new to be born. And what that means, we don't know. But we have a taste of it here in the Scriptures, that all of creation suffers under the burden of sin. But something new is going to be born, and all of creation is going to participate in this rebirth. That Christ is the firstborn from among the dead, that we follow him, and that all of creation is taken up into this new birth. This is the hope of every Christian soul. We don't look at the future, we don't look at the events of the world and we go, my gosh, the world is hopeless. But we have this hope because we know that Jesus is the firstborn among the dead. And he, having been raised from the tomb to life everlasting, is drawing all of life in his wake. All of existence. Every other soul that believes in him. And all of creation are caught up in his resurrection. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.